Ambassador Emily Parker adjusted her collar for the 100th time as she waited outside the grand chamber of the Galactic Council. The terrarium in her arms hummed softly, its environmental controls maintaining perfect conditions for its precious cargo. Around her, representatives from other newly spacefaring species clutched their own botanical offerings, each more spectacular than the last. A crystalline being from Rigel VI cradled what appeared to be a tree made entirely of translucent purple gems, its branches chiming melodiously with each movement. To her right, a methane-breathing cygnon held an enormous floating seed pod that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The delegation from Centauri Prime had needed anti-gravity platforms to transport their massive carnivorous vine, its tendrils reaching hungrily toward passing officials. "Next presentation, Earth," announced the chamber eye in its melodic tones. Parker took a deep breath and stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor of the ancient space station. The council chamber stretched upward for what seemed like miles, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the galaxy's spiral arm. 500 representatives from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations gazed down at her from their elevated positions, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. "Honorable Council," Parker began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I present Earth's contribution to the Shared Biodome Initiative." She placed the terrarium on the presentation pedestal, which immediately began scanning its contents. A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. The High Counselor, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate environmental suit, leaned forward. "Ambassador Parker, there seems to be some mistake. Your container appears significantly undersized compared to other contributions." Parker smiled, the expression she'd practiced for weeks in preparation for this moment. "No mistake, High Counselor. Earth presents a complete garden ecosystem, perfectly balanced and self-sustaining. The agreement clearly states one plant species per newly admitted civilization," interrupted a reptilian counselor, scales bristling with irritation. "Your submission appears to contain multiple specimens." "With respect, Counselor," Parker responded, touching a control on the terrarium's base. "Earth presents one garden. The specimens within work together as a single system, much like the organs in your body function as one being." The chamber's holographic display activated, projecting a magnified view of the terrarium's contents. Tiny tomato plants grew alongside basil and marigolds, their roots intertwined in a complex dance. Beneath the soil, mycorrhizal fungi created vast networks connecting each plant to its neighbors. Ladybugs patrolled the leaves, while earthworms turned the soil below. "This is unprecedented," muttered the High Counselor, energy form flickering with interest. "Your species has managed to create a miniature biosphere." "Not create," Parker corrected gently. "We've learned to work with natural systems that evolved on Earth over millions of years. This garden is a tiny replica of the relationships that exist in every Earth field and forest." The crystalline being who had presented earlier raised a faceted appendage. "But how can you control which plants grow where? What prevents one from dominating the others?" Parker's smile widened. "That's the beauty of it. We don't control. We guide. Each plant provides something the others need. The marigolds deter pests. The basil enhances the tomato's flavor. The mushrooms help distribute nutrients. It's a community, not a competition." More whispers filled the chamber, but now they carried a different tone. Wonder, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of concern. A High Counselor's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. "While this interpretation of the rules is unexpected, we find no explicit violation. Earth's contribution will be accepted into the shared biodome. However," they added, their tone sharpening slightly, "we will be watching its development with great interest." As Parker bowed and stepped back from the pedestal, she caught fragments of conversation from the other representatives. "Clever humans," someone muttered, "always finding ways around the rules." She allowed herself a small smile. They hadn't even discovered the vegetable seeds hidden in the worm castings yet. This garden was just the beginning. The inspection chamber hummed with activity as 3 of the Council's most respected xenobotanists examined Earth's contribution to the shared biodome. Ambassador Parker stood calmly, hands clasped behind her back, as they discovered each new layer of complexity within her single garden. Fascinating, breathed Dr. Kakaisen, their crystalline appendages gently probing the soil structure. The root systems are completely interconnected through fungal networks. It's as if they're communicating. Because they are, Parker explained, trying to hide her amusement as the younger Centauri botanist, Vex, frantically recorded every word. We call it the Wood Wide Web back on Earth. Plants share nutrients, send warning signals about pests, even support weaker members of the community through these networks. The third inspector, a massive gas-based being named Cloudweaver, swirled in agitation. This violates the spirit of the agreement. The other species brought individual specimens of great power or beauty. You've brought an entire ecosystem disguised as a single entry. Parker raised an eyebrow. The agreement specified 1 plant per species. We brought 1 garden. If you check Earth's legal databases, you'll find numerous precedents defining gardens as single entities for property and agricultural purposes. She's technically correct, Vex interjected, their antennae twitching excitedly. And look at these earthworms. They're constantly improving soil structure and nutrient distribution. I've never seen anything like it. Cloudweaver expanded irritably. That's another violation. The agreement mentioned nothing about including animals. The earthworms, insects, and microorganisms are essential components of any healthy soil system, Parker countered. They're no more separate from the garden than the bacteria in your own body are separate from you. Dr. Xizan made a sound like tinkling crystal. She has you there, Cloudweaver. We can't very well demand they remove naturally occurring soil organisms without compromising the entire system. The debate was interrupted by a sudden burst of activity in the terrarium. A ladybug had spotted an aphid attempting to feed on one of the tomato plants. The observers watched in fascination as the tiny predator efficiently dispatched the pest. Natural pest control, Vex whispered, adding another note to their already overflowing datapad. No need for chemical interventions or artificial controls. It's elegant. Parker nodded. Earth's ecosystems have had millions of years to develop these relationships. We didn't invent them. We just learned to work with them. Cloudweaver swirled thoughtfully. And the marigolds. They seem purely decorative. Actually, Parker said, they release compounds that deter harmful nematodes and attract pollinators. Plus, their deep roots help break up compacted soil. On Earth, we call this companion planting. Remarkable, Dr. Xizan said. Each component serves multiple purposes, creating redundancy and resilience. It's like a miniature civilization. Speaking of civilization, Cloudweaver interrupted, we should discuss these. They produced a handful of tiny seeds from the soil sample they'd been analyzing. Parker maintained her diplomatic smile. Ah yes, those would be vegetables naturally occurring in the soil from the decomposition process. Part of the normal cycle of growth and renewal in any garden ecosystem. Vex's antennae quivered with barely contained excitement. The garden is designed to expand, to grow beyond its original boundaries. All life seeks to grow, Parker replied carefully. We simply provide the conditions for it to do so naturally. The inspection team huddled together, discussing in hushed tones. Finally, Dr. Xizan turned back to Parker. While your submission pushes the boundaries of the agreement, we find no direct violations. The garden will be transferred to the shared biodome tomorrow. As Parker left the inspection chamber, she heard Vex asking their colleagues, but don't you see? This isn't just about growing plants. It's an entirely new approach to space station ecology. She smiled to herself. The seeds had been planted, both literally and figuratively. Now it was just a matter of watching them grow. 3 weeks after the garden's installation in the shared biodome, Ambassador Parker sat at her desk reviewing the station's atmospheric quality reports. The numbers were subtle but unmistakable. Oxygen content had increased by 0.3% in the dome's quadrant, while carbon dioxide levels had dropped correspondingly. A gentle chime announced a visitor. "Come in," she called, already knowing who it would be. Vex practically bounced through the doorway, their antennae vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Ambassador, you have to see this." The young Centauri botanist produced a holographic display showing time-lapse footage of the garden at night. Shadowy figures moved through the darkness. A methane breather from Epsilon taking soil samples, two crystalline beings carefully measuring leaf structures, even a usually reclusive energy weaver observing the fungal networks. "Interesting," Parker mused, hiding her satisfaction. "Our garden seems to be attracting quite a bit of attention." "That's not all," Vex continued, practically tripping over their words. "The atmospheric processors in that section are running at 15% reduced capacity, but achieving better results. And look at this." They switched the display to show the neighboring plants in the shared biodome. The massive specimens were subtly leaning toward the Earth garden, some even extending roots or tendrils in its direction. "It appears they're drawn to the nutrient exchange networks," Parker observed. "Natural systems tend to seek beneficial relationships." A soft rustle drew their attention to Parker's office door. Another anonymous note had been slipped underneath. She'd been receiving them daily. Questions about Earth agriculture, requests for information about companion planting, queries about soil composition, each written in a different alien script, all unsigned. "They're afraid to ask openly," Vex said, their usual enthusiasm dampening slightly. "The Council's traditionalists view Earth's approach as disruptive." Parker picked up the note, adding it to a growing stack on her desk. "Change often is, but that doesn't make it wrong." She led Vex to her office window, which overlooked the shared biodome. The Earth garden stood in stark contrast to its neighbors. While other specimens reached impressive heights or displayed spectacular colors, the garden quietly thrived, a complex tapestry of interconnected life. "Look there," Parker pointed to where a fallen leaf from the Rigelian crystal tree had landed in their garden soil. Rather than reject the foreign material, the earthworms had begun incorporating it into their castings, breaking down its mineral components to enrich the soil. Tiny crystals now sparkled throughout the garden bed, creating a subtle shimmer. "Ambassador," Vex hesitated, antennae twitching nervously. "Some of us have been wondering, was this your plan all along? To demonstrate a completely different way of thinking about space station ecosystems?" Parker smiled diplomatically. "Earth's history taught us that the most resilient systems are those that embrace diversity and cooperation. We simply apply that lesson to our contribution." Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert. The station's environmental monitoring system had detected something unprecedented. The air quality in the garden's quadrant now matched Earth's standard atmosphere, a level of purity previously achievable only through energy-intensive artificial processing. "How is this possible?" Vex wondered aloud, examining the readings. "Each part of the garden plays its role," Parker explained. "The plants photosynthesize, the fungi break down waste material, the insects pollinate and control pests, the worms enrich the soil. Together, they create something greater than the sum of their parts." As if to emphasize her point, a soft glow emanated from the garden as bioluminescent bacteria, a species no one had introduced, began to flourish in the enriched soil. The light pulsed gently, creating patterns that mirrored the rhythm of the station's day-night cycle. "It's adapting," Vex whispered in awe. "Not just surviving, but evolving to meet the station's needs." Parker nodded, watching as another group of aliens gathered around the garden, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. The whispers were growing louder, and soon they would be impossible to ignore. The warning sirens caught everyone off guard. Ambassador Parker was awakened by the harsh blare at 300 station time, her quarters bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting. The station's AI delivered the news in clipped tones. A massive solar flare had overwhelmed the station's magnetic shielding, causing cascading failures in the primary life support systems. All representatives report to emergency stations. The announcement echoed through the corridors. This is not a drill. Atmospheric degradation in progress. Parker rushed to the shared biodome, her heart pounding. The scene that greeted her was chaos. The mighty specimens from across the galaxy were wilting under the stress of the failing environmental controls. The Rigelian crystal tree's branches drooped, its musical tones becoming discordant. The massive carnivorous vine from Centauri Prime had already collapsed, its tendrils lying lifeless on the deck. The radiation surge has compromised the atmospheric processors, Dr. Ixizan reported, their crystalline form dulled with stress. Backup systems are failing faster than we can repair them. Cloudweaver materialized beside them, their gaseous form noticeably less dense than usual. Each species' contribution was meant to be self-sustaining, able to support itself and generate oxygen even in crisis. But they're all failing. Not all of them, Vex interrupted, pointing toward the Earth garden. While other plants withered, the garden remained vibrant. More than that, it seemed to be thriving, its activity visibly increased as if responding to the emergency. Parker rushed to the environmental monitoring station. Look at these readings. The garden's oxygen output has doubled in the last 10 minutes. Impossible. Cloudweaver swirled anxiously. No single species could adapt that quickly to these conditions. It's not a single species adapting, Parker explained, her voice urgent. It's an entire ecosystem responding. The stress is triggering survival mechanisms in each component, and they're working together to maintain balance. The station shuddered as another system failed. The mighty specimens continued to deteriorate, but the Earth garden was changing before their eyes. The tomato plants had redirected energy from fruit production to oxygen generation. The fungi network had expanded rapidly, breaking down dead material from the failing alien plants and converting it to nutrients. The earthworms worked frantically, aerating the soil to increase gas exchange. The garden's atmospheric influence is expanding, Vex reported, their antennae twitching as they analyzed the data. It's creating a bubble of stable air that's growing to fill the compromised sections. Dr. Xizan's crystalline form brightened with sudden understanding. The redundancy in the system, each species performing multiple functions, it makes the whole more resilient than any single specialized organism could be. The High Counselor arrived, their energy form flickering with concern. Status report. The Earth garden is compensating for the atmospheric loss, Cloudweaver admitted reluctantly. Its output has stabilized conditions in nearly 20% of the affected areas. More than that, Vex added excitedly. Look at the soil chemistry. The garden is actively processing the radiation that leaked through the shields, using it to power enhanced growth. It's not just surviving the crisis, it's using it. Parker watched as maintenance crews began rerouting ventilation systems to spread the garden's influence throughout the station. The same council members who had scoffed at Earth's modest contribution now gathered around it, watching in amazement as it worked to save them all. How did you know? The High Counselor asked Parker quietly. How did you know it would be able to handle something like this? We didn't, Parker admitted. But Earth's history is full of disasters. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, climate shifts. Life always finds a way to adapt and survive, not through individual strength, but through cooperation and mutual support. As the crisis alarms finally fell silent, Parker noticed something remarkable. Seeds from the Earth garden had taken root in the rich soil around the fallen alien specimens. New growth was already visible, but it wasn't just Earth plants growing. They were intermingling with the surviving alien species, creating something entirely new. The breaking point had passed, but it was clear to everyone that nothing would be the same after this night. The whispers about Earth's approach had become a roar, and change was coming to the Galactic Council, whether they were ready or not. 2 months after the solar flare incident, the shared biodome had become unrecognizable. Where once stood isolated specimens of alien flora, now thrived an integrated ecosystem that defied categorization. Ambassador Parker stood at her usual observation point, watching as Vex led another tour group through what station residents had started calling the Fusion Garden. Notice how the earth tomato vines have wound themselves around the remaining crystal branches of the Regilian tree, Vex explained to the assembled Cenobotanists. The crystalline structure amplifies the available light, while the vines provide organic support to the weakened branches. Neither species could achieve this alone. Parker smiled as she remembered the initial panic when they discovered the integration. The Rigelian representatives had been horrified at first, until they realized their precious tree was growing stronger than ever, its musical tones now accompanied by a subtle harmony produced by wind through the tomato leaves. Ambassador, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Dr. Xizan leading a group of senior scientists from various worlds. We've completed our analysis of the soil composition. The results are unprecedented. The holographic display showed microscopic images of the garden soil. The original Earth microbiome had adapted to incorporate alien organic matter, creating entirely new nutrient cycles. Crystalline structures merged with fungal networks, while energy-based life forms danced between the mineral particles. The soil isn't just supporting life. One scientist noted, their bioluminescent appendages pulsing with excitement. It's evolving, creating new possibilities we never imagined. In the garden below, a group of maintenance workers were installing atmospheric sampling equipment. Since the crisis, the station's engineering team had been studying how to replicate the garden's extraordinary air purification capabilities. The workers paused frequently to admire the new growth patterns, pointing out where earth beings had started climbing up strands of living light from an energy weaver's contribution. We've detected something else, Dr. Xizan continued, adjusting the holographic display. The fungal networks have begun transmitting signals we can't quite decode. They appear to be communicating not just between plants, but with some of the silicon-based life forms from other worlds. Parker nodded, unsurprised. On Earth, we're only beginning to understand the complexity of plant communication. In a way, this garden is teaching us as much as we're teaching others. A commotion near the garden's center drew their attention. A class of young aliens from various species had gathered for what had become a daily ritual. Parker recognized several council members' children among them, their earlier prejudices forgotten in their fascination with the garden's mysteries. Vex stood in the middle of the group, carefully demonstrating how to transplant seedlings. Gently now, they instructed, their antennae swaying in harmony with the garden's rhythms. Feel how the soil wants to support life. That's not just chemistry. It's millions of years of evolution teaching us how to grow together. The children's questions tumbled over each other. Why do some plants grow better next to others? How do the worms know where to go? Can we create gardens like this on our homeworlds? Parker watched as Vex answered each question with patience and enthusiasm, their own understanding of Earth's ecological principles growing deeper with each explanation. The young Zentari had become the garden's most devoted advocate, spending countless hours documenting the new interactions between species. A soft chime announced an incoming message on Parker's communicator. Another request for information about Earth agriculture, this time from a civilization that had initially been among the most skeptical of their approach. The message came with detailed scans of their world's soil composition and climate patterns, hoping to understand how they might adapt Earth's methods to their conditions. They're beginning to understand, Dr. Xizan observed, their crystalline form refracting the garden's light into rainbow patterns. It's not about controlling nature or showcasing individual specimens. It's about creating conditions where life can find its own way forward. Parker touched a leaf of one of the original tomato plants, now thriving in ways she never imagined possible. That's humanity's real gift to the galaxy, she said quietly. Not the plants themselves, but the understanding that the strongest systems are those that grow together. The unofficial gardening classes had outgrown their original space 3 times now. Ambassador Parker stood at the back of the converted cargo bay, watching as Vex guided representatives from 30 different species, through the basics of companion planting. The room had been transformed into a teaching garden, with demonstration plots showing various stages of integration between Earth and alien species. The key isn't just putting plants together, Vex explained, their antennae swaying as they demonstrated with a handful of seeds. It's understanding the relationships they form, just as the Methane brothers of Epsilon share resources through their communal breathing chambers. Plants create underground networks of mutual support, a crystalline being raised a faceted appendage. But how do we know which combinations will work? Our world's flora operates on completely different principles. That's the beauty of it, Parker interjected, stepping forward. We don't always know. Earth's agricultural history is full of discoveries made by careful observation and willingness to learn from failure. Every mistake teaches us something new. The cargo bay's walls were lined with experimental plots where species from across the galaxy grew together in unexpected harmony. Earth wheat stalks supported floating light plants from the Pleiades. Mushrooms from Alpha Centauri formed symbiotic relationships with Earth legumes, creating new nitrogen-fixing processes that worked in zero gravity. Ambassador called a voice from the doorway. A junior diplomat from the Energy Collective hovered nervously. The High Council requests your presence. There's been a development. Parker followed the diplomat through the station's corridors, noting how the air quality had improved everywhere. The garden's influence had spread far beyond the shared biodome, its principles being incorporated into the station's basic life support systems. The council chamber was unusually crowded. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the observer galleries, many clutching soil samples or plant specimens. The High Counselor's energy form pulsed with an unreadable emotion. Ambassador Parker, they began, we have received 723 formal requests for information about Earth agricultural practices in the past week alone. The Council's communication systems are overwhelmed. I apologize for any inconvenience, Parker offered diplomatically. We can establish a dedicated channel for. That's not why we called you here, interrupted Cloudweaver, their gaseous form having gained new respect since the crisis. Show her. The chamber's holographic display activated, showing images from various worlds across the galaxy. On a crystal planet, Earth-style gardens grew in protected valleys, their organic processes gradually reshaping the mineral landscape. A gas giant's floating cities had incorporated living walls based on Earth designs, improving their atmospheric processors' efficiency by 300%. Your one garden has sparked a revolution, the High Counselor stated. Species that haven't modified their environments in millions of years are experimenting with integrated ecosystems. The Council is concerned about progress, challenged a voice from the gallery. Vex stepped forward, their usual nervousness replaced by conviction. The garden saved this station. Imagine what these principles could do for worlds struggling with atmospheric degradation or resource depletion. Dr. Xaizen's crystalline form sparkled as they added, we've documented 47 new symbiotic relationships between species that were previously thought incompatible. The potential for scientific advancement is extraordinary. Parker watched the debate unfold, noting how the chamber had unofficially divided itself like a garden ecosystem. The conservatives clustered together like protective thorns, while the progressives spread through the space like pioneering vines, seeking new connections. Perhaps, she suggested quietly, this is about more than just plants. Earth's history taught us that the most successful species aren't necessarily the strongest or most specialized, but those most able to adapt and form beneficial relationships. The High Counselor's energy form flickered thoughtfully. You're suggesting that humanity's true contribution to the galaxy is not the garden itself, but the philosophy behind it. Every garden tells a story, Parker replied, gesturing to the images of growing experiments across the galaxy. These are stories of different species learning to thrive together, supporting each other despite their differences. Isn't that what the Galactic Council is supposed to be about? The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. In that moment, Parker realized that the garden had become more than an experiment or a diplomatic coup. It had become a metaphor for a new way of thinking about life among the stars. The emergency council session had been running for 3 days straight. Ambassador Parker stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by holograms showing the transformation spreading across the galaxy. Behind her, Vex coordinated with a team of xenobotanists, processing real-time data from 1,000 worlds. The motion before the council is unprecedented, the High Counselor announced, their energy form crackling with intensity. The delegation from Earth proposes a complete redesign of all current and future space habitats based on what they call integrated ecological principles. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices. The conservative faction, led by representatives from the oldest spacefaring races, raised immediate objections. Our stations have functioned perfectly well for millennia, argued a silicon-based elder. Why should we restructure everything based on the theories of a species barely out of their gravity well? Because your perfectly functional stations nearly killed us all during the solar flare, Cloudweaver countered, their gaseous form expanding with emotion. While your single-species solutions failed, Earth's garden not only survived, but helped save us all. Parker activated a new holographic display, showing the latest data from experimental stations across the galaxy. We're not asking you to abandon your traditions, she explained. We're suggesting we learn from each other, just as our plants have done. The display showed new space habitats where crystal gardens grew alongside Earth vegetables, their combined properties creating stronger structures than either could achieve alone. Energy beings had learned to weave their living light through organic matter, creating self-sustaining biospheres that could survive almost anywhere. Look at these efficiency ratings, Vex added excitedly. Stations implementing Earth-style integrated ecosystems show 400% improvement in atmospheric processing, 250% increase in structural resilience, and 180% better radiation resistance. Dr. Exisen stepped forward, their crystalline form now permanently altered by exposure to Earth's garden, showing traces of organic patterns within their matrix. The scientific evidence is irrefutable. These systems work not despite their complexity, but because of it. But the cost, protested another council member, retrofitting every station in the galaxy, is far less than the cost of another catastrophic failure, interrupted a new voice. The chamber fell silent as the representative of the quantum collective spoke. Their species rarely participated in council debates, preferring to observe probability streams. We have analyzed all potential futures, they continued. Those that maintain current isolation protocols show a 73.2% chance of critical system failure within the next century. Futures incorporating Earth's ecological approach show only 12.4% chance of similar failures. Parker watched as the momentum in the chamber shifted. Even the most conservative members couldn't ignore the quantum collective's predictions, but she knew they needed one more push. I invite any who still doubt to visit the original garden, she offered. See how it's evolved. The Earth plants you thought would overwhelm everything. They'd found balance with species from 100 worlds. The garden isn't just surviving. It's creating new possibilities we never imagined. The High Counselor's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. Perhaps a compromise. Begin with new construction and voluntary retrofits. Life doesn't compromise, Vex said quietly, surprising everyone with their firmness. It adapts. It finds ways to work together, or it dies. We're not suggesting Earth's way is the only way. We're showing that working together makes us all stronger. The chamber's atmosphere seemed to shift as understanding dawned. The garden wasn't just about plants or space stations. It was about the fundamental nature of life itself, about finding ways to thrive together in the vastness of space. The council will vote, the High Counselor announced. But first, I believe we should all visit this garden that has caused such a stir, not as legislators or critics, but as living beings seeking to understand our place in the greater ecosystem of the galaxy. As the council members filed out toward the shared biodome, Parker caught Vex's eye. The young Zentary's antennae were quivering with excitement. "They're beginning to understand," Vex whispered. "The garden isn't just changing the station. It's changing how we think about everything." Parker nodded, watching as species that once would never have interacted began discussing possibilities for their own worlds. The revolution wasn't just in bloom. It was bearing fruit. 5 years after Earth's one garden arrived at the Galactic Council station, Ambassador Parker stood in the observation dome of humanity's newest diplomatic outpost. Below her, the massive space station bloomed like a flower, its spiral arms filled with interconnected gardens that merged seamlessly with the structure itself. "The last retrofits are complete," Vex announced, their antennae now permanently tinted green from years of working with hybrid plants. Every major station in Council space now incorporates living systems based on Earth principles. Parker smiled, remembering the tiny terrarium that had started it all. "And how many new species combinations have been documented?" "We stopped counting at 10,000, Dr. Xizin answered, their crystalline form now hosting its own thriving ecosystem of symbiotic organisms. "The rate of innovation has exceeded all projections." The observation dome offered a panoramic view of the changes their initiative had wrought. The station's external hull now featured living layers of photosynthetic crystals, developed through collaboration between Earth botanists and Rigelian crystal shapers. Streams of energy beings flowed through organic conduits, their light nurturing new forms of life while their movement powered crucial systems. Ambassador, called Cloudweaver, swirling in through a ventilation port. "The Council's annual assessment is complete. The integration of living systems has reduced operational costs by 85% across all participating stations. The old guard can't argue with those numbers. They've stopped trying," Vex added with a satisfied twitch of their antennae. This morning's session was about expanding the program to planetary installations. The Methan brothers want to adapt the system for their gas giant colonies. Parker walked to a different window, this one overlooking the original garden. It had grown beyond all recognition, becoming a template for stations throughout the galaxy. But more than that, it had become a symbol of what was possible when different species worked together. "We're ready for the ceremony," announced a junior diplomat, their bioluminescent patterns showing excitement. The group made their way to the central chamber, now transformed into a vast greenhouse where representatives from every council race gathered. The High Councilor's energy form pulsed with formal dignity as they began the proceedings. 5 years ago, humanity surprised us all with their interpretation of our one-plant rule, they began. Today, we formalize what they taught us into galactic law. The Parker Principle, as it shall be known, establishes that all future space development must follow integrated ecological design. Parker stepped forward to activate the chamber's main display. Images flowed past. Desert worlds where Earth cacti grew alongside crystalline formations. Gas giant habitats where floating gardens improved atmospheric processing. Deep space stations where hybrid plants created oxygen from stellar radiation. But the true impact goes beyond mere efficiency, the High Councilor continued. "We've learned that the strongest systems are those that embrace diversity, that find ways to turn differences into advantages. Humanity showed us that the path forward isn't through isolation or competition, but through cooperation and adaptation." Vex, now the head of the Council's Xenobotanical Division, presented the latest data. "We've documented the emergence of entirely new forms of life in these integrated systems, species that would never have existed without this program. The garden isn't just growing, it's evolving." "Which brings us to our next phase," Parker announced. "Earth proposes the establishment of seed ships, vessels carrying diverse biological packages to help terraform new worlds, not through conquest or control, but through cooperation with existing ecosystems." The chamber filled with approving murmurs. Even the most conservative council members had come to appreciate the elegant efficiency of Earth's approach. As the ceremony concluded, Parker found herself back at the window overlooking the original garden. A group of children from different species played there, learning about biology and ecology together. They didn't see plants from Earth or crystals from Rigel. They saw a single, interconnected system that made life better for everyone. "You know," Vex said quietly, joining her at the window, "when you first arrived with that little terrarium, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Parker smiled, watching as a new species of floating crystal plant drifted past, its existence a testament to the endless possibilities of life. "That's the thing about gardens," she replied. "You never really know what will grow from the seeds you plant." Above them, the stars beckoned, each one promising new worlds where life in all its forms could flourish together. The garden had started small, but like all living things, it had found ways to grow beyond its original boundaries. And it was still growing.